Mr. Majewski's Anatomy 32 class. Lecture on Chapter 3, Types of Tissues, Junctions, and Muscle and Nervous Tissues. Tissues. Well, the technical definition is a group of cells that usually have a common origin in the embryo and function to carry out specialized activities. You can reinterpret that definition as a group of very similar cells that work together to do something. So there are four basic tissues. There is epithelial tissue, which covers body surfaces and lines hollow organs, body cavities, and ducts, and also forms the glands. And a good example of this is the skin on our body is composed of a lot of epithelial tissue. Second is connective tissue. Connective tissue is very diverse. It does things like protect and support the body and organs. It binds organs together and is a storage place for fat and can provide immunity. Examples of connective tissue include bone, blood, and tendons. Muscular tissue. It is specialized for contractions and generation of force for movement. Yes, for movement both of the body itself in terms of moving your arms and legs and movement of things like food through your digestive system. And also these muscular contractions generate heat, which gives us our body temperature. And then finally, nervous tissue. This tissue detects changes in internal and external conditions, and in response controls the activities of muscles and glands. The most common cell in the nervous tissue that people know the best is the neuron, as shown in the picture on this slide. Cell junctions. Well, when you have tissues, often they directly contact each other. And at these contact points, you have what are called cell junctions, which is when the plasma membranes of the neighboring cells touch. And there are 5 main kinds of cell junctions, or ways that the cells that are touching can connect to each other. The first is tight junctions. Tight junctions basically fuse the adjacent plasma membranes to provide a very tight seal. A good example of this is in the stomach lining. We want the cells of our stomach to not let any of that dangerous acid to escape into the rest of our body. I often think of tight junctions as a kind of natural superglue. Next is adherent junctions. Here you have a dense layer of proteins that connects transmembrane proteins with microfilaments, and this is to resist separation. So as you can see, the microfilaments, which is part of the exoskeleton, are located in a strip with these proteins that then contact the transmembrane proteins that adhere. I like to think of this as a kind of Velcro, because even though it does attach the cells together, it isn't as impenetrable as the tight junctions. And a good example of where these are located is the intestine. Third is desmosomes. They also have a dense layer of proteins that are connecting transmembrane proteins with intermediate filaments in this case, another player in the cytoskeleton. I like to think of desmosomes as sort of rivets that will tightly join the two cells together. This allows them to resist many strong forces. So a good example of where this is the heart. Because the heart is constantly pumping and contracting, we really don't want those cells to rip apart. 4 is the hemidesmosomes. This actually is an example of cells contacting something other than other cells. So again, you have the dense layer of proteins that connect transmembrane proteins with the intermediate filaments, but in this case it anchors epithelial tissue to the basement membrane, which is found at the base layer of all epithelial tissues. And then finally you have gap junctions. Gap junctions are basically membrane proteins that form tiny fluid-filled tunnels with neighboring cells. So basically you get a channel connecting the cytosol of both cells. This is especially important in areas where you do not have vascularization. So for instance, the lenses of the eye. We do not want blood vessels going through the lens of our eye, giving us red streaks. However, those cells still need to receive nutrients and to get rid of waste, and this occurs through diffusion through these gap junctions. So here is an image of some cells that possess all 5 of the types of cell junctions. This is never going to happen in the real world, but it does give a pretty picture to help show some of the differences between these different kinds of junctions. So now we're going to move on to specifically talk about muscle tissue. And muscle tissue is consisting of cells that are very elongated and are often referred to as muscle fibers or myocytes. And it's through the use of a lot of ATP that these cells are able to generate a force that causes a contraction. The 3 main types of muscle tissue are skeletal muscle tissue, such as seen in the picture on this slide. That lets us move our bones of our body. Cardiac muscle tissue, which causes the heart to pump, and smooth muscle tissue, which is located in places like hollow organs, such as our esophagus and stomach and intestines, and also in things like blood vessels. So, skeletal muscle tissue. The first thing you'll see is these are long, column-shaped cells that have multiple nucleuses. They also have these very interesting and always expected striations. So you see these lines going across those muscle fiber cells. They are one of the ubiquitous features of skeletal muscle tissue. Usually located at places where bones, usually attached to bones by tendons, although they can be attached to other things, and their main functions is motion, posture, heat production, and protection of, say, deeper internal organs like the muscle sheets found at the anterior side of our abdomen. Cardiac muscle tissue is found only in the heart wall, and it functions to pump blood to all parts of the body. You can see, looking at that picture, a few differences between cardiac muscle tissue and muscle tissue, skeletal muscle tissue. While both have those striations, the cardiac muscle cells are much shorter, and at the border between adjacent cells, you see a thick line. That is actually where those desmosomes are located, that are attaching one cardiac muscle cell to the next cardiac muscle cell. Also, cardiac muscle cells tend to have only 1 or 2 nucleuses per cell, and though they are sort of columnar in shape, they occasionally branch off, forming little Y-shaped cells. And then smooth muscle tissue. Here you can see that smooth muscle tissue, like the other two, are very elongated. However, they are not in that column sort of shape, but attenuate on either end. You can also see that smooth muscle cells tend to have only 1 nucleus per cell, and it's kind of large in comparison to the total length of the cell. Finally, smooth muscle tissue lacks the striations. You do not see the expected striational pattern. And smooth muscle tissues are located in places like the irises of the eye. So the color of your eye is actually the color of that smooth muscle tissue. It's also found in the walls of internal structures such as blood vessels, the stomach, the gallbladder, and so forth. And its main function is motion, more of a squeezing to help push things along. So, smooth muscle tissue, long, skinny cells, 1 nucleus, no striation. Cardiac muscle tissue, long column-like cells that sometimes branch, and very key, you have striations and the intercalated discs. And skeletal muscle tissue, many nucleuses per column or cell, striation, but no intercalated discs. Next is the nervous tissue. Nervous tissue is composed of 2 big categories of cells, the neurons and the neuroglia that support them. However, for this chapter, we'll be focusing primarily on what the neurons look like. So if you look at a neuron, you see that it has a large cell body with shorter protrusions called dendrites, and then usually 1 really long structure called the axon. In both cases, the slide and the cartoon of a neuron, they have cut the axon off, so you don't get to see how long it potentially can be. But in some cases, a axon can stretch from the brain all the way down to the feet. So, nervous tissue obviously is located in the nervous system, which would be the brain, spinal cord, and nerves that stretch out of the spinal cord. Its functions is to be sensitive to stimuluses and detect those stimuluses, to then convert that into a nerve impulse and conduct it along the length of the neuron, and eventually to other neurons or muscle fibers or glands. That is it for part 1 of this lecture.